The war in Mali is one of West Africa's hottest conflicts, although not for lack of competition. While the tenuous Russia-Ukraine connection has drawn some attention, the average Western mill watcher doesn't really know a whole lot about African militaries in general. In this video, I'm going to talk about Mali's army structure and how it correlates with the current conflict. I know what you like, so I'll be talking about what assortment of vehicles they bring to bear, stuff like... And I'm gonna pay special attention to Mali's armored units since we're a bit cav-pilled here. But first, an overview of the conflict's geography so you can get your bearings. Mali is not small. If you superimposed it over the US, it'd reach from central Texas to Michigan. Government control and pro-government militias are centralized in southwestern and central Mali, which is much more densely populated and inhabited by several sub-Saharan ethnic groups. Meanwhile, Mali's arid north, called Azawad by its nomadic Tuareg population, is contested. North of the 15th parallel, state control doesn't extend far beyond the Niger River bend, population centers, and major roadways, such as routes 18 and 19 up towards Tessalit. They're opposed by three loose factions made up of numerous constituent groups with different interests and areas of operation. The three threats, so to speak, oppose each other, but also all oppose the Malian government. They're the broadly secular Tuareg and Arab coordination of Azawad movements, who seek self-determination for the north. The Al-Qaeda-aligned JNIM, who wish to see Sharia enforced throughout Mali, although nowadays global Al-Qaeda's influence is questionable. And the Islamic State Sahel province. The secular coalition had actually been in a formal peace agreement with the Malian government since 2015, but hostilities resumed in 2023. This was triggered by the UN's withdrawal from Mali at the junta's request, as the UN's MINUSMA mission was charged with monitoring the peace agreement and identifying human rights violations. Islamist activity extends significantly further southwest than the secular Tuareg rebels. The JNIM-affiliated Messina Liberation Front, for example, is centered around the ethnically Fulani region of Mopti. In the late 2010s, they were responsible for 3/4 of JNIM-attributed fatalities and the vast majority of attacks targeting civilians. They've executed violence in Mali's westernmost province and into Burkina Faso, far from the cause of Tuareg nationalism. Mali is supported by the Russian Wagner Group for now, and in November of 2023, they were able to seize Kidal from the Tuaregs. But Malian forces arguably place support for Wagner's more aggressive operations on their behalf than the other way around. This is shown by Wagner possibly losing as many or even more men during the Battle of Tinzouatin alone than the French did during their entire 9-year involvement. Now, how does the structure of the Malian army, abbreviated FAMA, play into the conflict? Mali is basically split into 8 military regions, alternatively called defense zones. They're sort of brigade-sized in terms of organic units under the command of a colonel, but are roughly tied to the country's regions. They're equivalent to provinces. Going down the list, first region covers the Gao and Menaka regions in Mali's east, while the second covers Ségou. The third covers the capital of Bamako and the region of Koulikoro. The fourth covers Kayi in the west. The fifth covers Timbuktu and Taoudini to the northwest. The sixth covers Mopti. The seventh covers the Kidal region in the extreme northeast. And finally, the eighth covers Sikasso south of the capital. To put this organization into context, the Battle of Tinzouatin in July of 2024, where dozens of Russian Wagner mercenaries and Malian soldiers were killed, took place in the 7th Region's area along the border with Algeria. In terms of unit designations, it's pretty easy to figure out who's from where. Regiments, equivalent to battalions, will have their first numeral correspond to their military region, so the 71st Motorized Infantry Regiment at Tessalit is in the 7th region, and the 63rd Armored Regiment at Sivary is in the 6th region. Those regiments' constituent companies, batteries, or squadrons will then have numbers that correspond to their parent regiment. So for example, the 11th Regiment has companies numbered the 111th, 112th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. The first company is usually a command and logistics company. However, there's a parallel system of joint commands to coordinate armed forces assets part of Operation Malako. Mali's counter-terrorism, counter-guerrilla operation in the country's east around Ansar Dine and Tuareg rebel strongholds, and the central Niger River bend where the Messina Liberation Front operates. A similar Operation Keletigi covers the west. At the high level, Operation Malako is split into two theaters called Joint Theater Command Posts, commanded by an Army senior colonel. The Eastern Theater covering Kidal, Gao, and Manaka, and the Central Theater covering Ségou, Mopti, Timbuktu, and Taoudani. These are further divided into sectors that roughly correspond to military regions, going so far as to share a commander in most cases, but are for the most part numbered differently. In the Eastern Theater, Sector 1 covers Military Region 1 based in Gao, the only easy one. Sector 2 is synonymous with Region 7 covering Kidal. Sectors 3, 4, and 5 meanwhile make up the Central Theater, corresponding to the 5th, 6th, and 2nd region respectively. The 3rd and 4th regions to the west are generally referenced in relation to Operation Keletigi, and in November of 2023 they were aligned under a new Southern Theater. Malian infantry are largely mounted on pickup trucks for patrolling, as well as larger trucks for administrative moves and delivering humanitarian aid. Toyota Land Cruisers and Korean Kia KM450s based on the American Kaiser Jeep M715 are big workhorses. Although, as with any military using non-standardized equipment, there are a variety of models in service. In 2020, it was reported that Mali received 53 vehicles from Algeria. Among them, a number of Chinese Dongfeng EQ 2050s, which are basically Humvee equivalents. And they have some French-provided vehicles like the Akmat ALTV and Mastech T4, although neither the French or Chinese vehicles seem to come close to the Toyotas and Kias. All of these vehicles have been seen mounting a variety of armaments, but the high-frequency ones are Soviet, 7.62 PKs and SG-43s, 12.7mm Dishkas, NSVs, Kords, and Chinese W-85s, 14.5mm anti-aircraft machine guns, 23mm autocannons, AGS-17 grenade launchers, recoilless rifles, and rocket artillery. I've even now seen them mounting a BPU-1 turret cannibalized from a BTR-60PB or BRDM-2 in the bed of a pickup truck several times. That includes both the Toyota Land Cruiser and KM450s. They're sometimes mixed in with more conventional technicals. Chat, you can't get mad at me, I think he's part of the cute little guy club. In addition to light vehicles, MRAPs, or mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, have been one of the more transformative capabilities acquired since the Afro-French intervention of 2013. They represent some of Mali's most modern armored vehicles. In 2014, 1 year after Operation Serval, Mali received 14 Bastion armored personnel carriers based on the VLRA truck. They were issued to the 134th Recon Squadron in Gao, although this has since been redesignated a motorized infantry company. They were trained in basic cavalry concepts, scouting techniques, convoy escort, and countering IEDs by the EU's light armored training team in Mali, manned by the Italian 3rd Cavalry and 31st Tank Regiment. Mali received 13 more Bastions procured with EU funding from Malian forces part of the G5 Sahel Joint Force before its withdrawal in May of 2022. In May of 2019, 29 South African-produced Casper MRAPs were provided by Germany. The same year, 19 Marauder MRAPs were bought from South Africa for 55 million rand. At least some of them are equipped with 14.5mm turrets. 24 Storm 4x4s based on the Toyota Land Cruiser 79 were procured from Qatar in 2019 as well, and 30 or 35 Typhoon MRAPs and 15 Cougar APCs from the UAE in 2020. Immediately before the 2021 coup, Germany equipped Mali with an additional 30 Puma M36 MRAPs from OTT Technologies. To support their sovereigntist streak post-coup, they procured a number of Chinese VP-11 MRAPs as well, reported by some to be part of a larger 100-vehicle package of armored vehicles from China. Small numbers of European, Middle Eastern, and Chinese-sourced MRAPs were visually confirmed as lost during the Battle of Tinzhuatin. In terms of unit structure, the Malian army has both permanent administrative regiments and French-style task forces. I'll start with the regiments. The bulk of the army is made up of motorized infantry regiments, or RIMs. I don't know for sure how many they have, but the minimum number is 19 based on news articles and a Malian government report from 2021 pointed to me by my designated French guy Asalambra, DFG for short. But anyway, where a structure is listed, these regiments typically have a command and logistics company and 4 motorized infantry companies. The mysterious 54th Regiment in particular is supposed to have an additional support company as well, which, going by French parlance, is probably a weapons company. There's also the 33rd Parachute Commando Regiment, a nominally airborne unit and one of the units implicated in the Mora massacre, consisting of a command and logistics company, 4 commando parachute companies or CCPs, and an airborne training company. Keep in mind that Mali doesn't publish every regiment that exists necessarily, and they seem to go through redesignations and reorgs fairly frequently, so it could be more, but probably not a ton more. And that's not to say all these regiments are fully manned. I'm especially suspicious of the 53rd and 54th regiments, which were labeled as garrisoned in areas which weren't under government control as of 2021. There wasn't even a UN presence here, just Tuareg rebels and Al-Qaeda. The capital of Tau Denis isn't even a city, it's just the ruins of an old penal colony and a hand-dug salt mining site a few kilometers southwest. All of this area's supposed governors residents in Timbuktu. In addition to MRAPs, the Malians operate a number of more proper armored vehicles, although for the most part they're outdated. These seem to be largely operated by their cavalry arm. Mali's armored vehicle inventory is indicative of some of the vibes that were going on prior to the Afro-French intervention of 2013. That is, an under-equipped military that, proportional to the threat, was overinvested in conventional capabilities that it rarely deployed outside of its mostly secure southern areas. During the Cold War, the Malian army understood its primary mission to be security against other states, rather than the internal threats it faces today. A big conventional army is a great status symbol, and one the Malians leaned into after independence from France in pursuit of sovereign legitimacy. The fact that tank units have generally been stationed within 30 minutes to 3 hours of the capital, and at least one PT-76 was seen on the streets of the capital during the 2012 coup, but not much elsewhere, suggests they're more useful for regime preservation and clout than anything. Going down the list, Mali acquired 20 PT-76s from the Soviet Union in 1975, and at some point a number of T-54 medium tanks, possibly up to 14 according to the French government. Mali also received 18 Chinese Type 62s in the early 80s. This made up its proper tank inventory, although availability was low and the PT-76 in particular had issues with ammo supply. Other types of AFVs were more numerous. Mali's reported to have procured 20 BRDM-2s from the Soviets in 1975, plus an additional 44 from Bulgaria in the late 2000s. They received 10 BTR-60 PBs from the Soviets in 1983, 35 from Bulgaria in the 2000s, 10 from Ukraine in the early 2010s, as well as 9 BTR-70s. A small number of BMP-1s are in inventory, although they're probably not used, plus 5 Egyptian FOD APCs procured in the 80s. But it's questionable how much of this was available by the time of the 2012 Tuareg Rebellion. One French report suggests they only had 35 BRDM-2s and 18 BTR-60 PBs on hand. They've since taken delivery of at least 6 Chinese VN-2C infantry fighting vehicles as well, and maybe a handful of BRDM-2s and BTR-70s. The best I can tell, Mali has at least 5 cavalry regiments. The 14th Armored Regiment, 42nd Scout and Investigation Regiment, 63rd Armored Regiment, 74th Scout and Investigation Regiment, and 82nd Armored Regiment. Remember the first number is what region they're in. At one point, there was a 35th Armored Regiment at Kati that as of 2018 had the Army's T-54Bs. T-54s were seen on exercise in this area in the early 2010s, but in 2023, this was reported to be a motorized infantry regiment with a new camp under construction. In 2021, there was also a dilapidated T-54 at Sivary, possibly associated with the 63rd Armored Regiment, although don't quote me on that. I've not personally seen a cavalry unit designated for the 2nd and 5th regions. Although called an armored regiment, the 14th is actually more or less the same as the Scout and Investigation regiments. It has a Command and Logistics Squadron, or ECL, and 4 Scout and Investigation Squadrons, or EEIs. But the 42nd and 74th regiments have 5 EEIs. In French phraseology, an EEI is a light reconnaissance unit, and they don't have any armor listed in this 2021 government report, so they're probably based on technicals and motorcycles. The 63rd Armored Regiment, meanwhile, has an ECL and 4 reconnaissance squadrons. It's unclear if there's any practical difference in real life, although in French terms, reconnaissance is usually a more offensive or combat-oriented task when compared to scouting, which is more stealth-oriented. In the last regiment, the 82nd, these units are prescribed armored vehicles. The 82nd Regiment is assigned a Command and Services Squadron, or ECS, 1 tank squadron, and 2 reconnaissance squadrons. As of 2021, the tank squadron was meant to be equipped with Soviet PT-76 amphibious light tanks and Chinese Type 62 light tanks. We know at least a platoon of Type 62s are stored in relatively good condition in the province, although the PT-76 appears to be slightly more usable. The 823rd Recon Squadron had much more practical BRDM-2 scout cars, and the 824th Recon had BTR-60 armored personnel carriers. To briefly mention supporting arms, Mali has at least 4 artillery regiments: the 15th, 24th, 36th, possibly redesignated the 37th, and a presumably new 44th. Available orgs show mixed regiments, each with a command and service battery, a battery of ZSU-23-4 Shilka SPAA, a battery of ZU-23-2 autocannons, truck-mounted as a relatively common technical configuration, a battery of BM-21 Grad rocket artillery, a battery of D-30 122mm howitzers, which have been referenced as not maintained, although they have been seen towed by Toyotas, and a battery of Grad 2Ms, which is a single-tube, tripod-mounted 122mm rocket launcher that can be man-packed by 5 people and was designed to use the same munition as the BM-21. As by far the simplest heavy indirect fire option beyond the mortars employed by the infantry, the Grad 2M was most usable by EU-trained task forces. In 2021, it appears they also formed a new 614th Field Artillery Battery with D-30 122mm howitzers at Sivary trained by the EU. But the conversion of the 61st from a mixed regiment at Sivary to a motorized infantry regiment at Douenza makes me uncertain. Regions 1, 2, and 3 also have an engineer regiment. Between these regiments are 5 combat engineer companies, 3 floating bridge companies, 2 construction companies that also have water purification duties, and an engineer river company. That last formation is a riverboat unit doctrinally capable of monitoring 6 to 8 kilometers of river day or night, crossing a combat platoon, and covering maneuver units conducting a wet gap crossing. The other units just have a detachment though, basically a reinforced company. Taking after French doctrine, the Malians employ battalion task forces called GTIAs, or Combined Arms Tactical Groups in French. These are composed of SGTIAs, or Combined Arms Tactical Subgroups, basically company teams that can operate semi-autonomously. These are generated using elements from different regiments, and, at least initially, were meant to represent the elite of the Malian army trained by European Union advisors. In theory, the original 4 GTIAs trained in 2014 were intended to consist of about 700 men with 60 to 80 vehicles. They're usually cited in the news as being led by commandants, the francophonic equivalent to a major, or lieutenant colonels, the typical rank of a regimental commander. They'd have a support and logistics company, 3 infantry companies with SPG-9 recoilless rifles and 60mm mortars in support, a platoon-sized commando detachment attached from the 33rd Parachute Commando Regiment, an armored squadron equipped with BTR-60 PBs, an engineer company attached from an engineer regiment, a Grad 2M rocket launcher battery, and 3 TAC-P teams from the Malian Air Force for guiding in airstrikes. A total of 8 European-trained GTIAs were stood up by 2016. The 33rd Parachute Commando Regiment recently stood up their own battle group called GTIA Nangui in 2023. Before, its detachments were usually an augmentation to conduct infiltrations, gather intelligence, and fix the enemy for the rest of the GTIA. Although the Malians notably had issues with coordinating the actions of multiple GTIAs in a single operation. Operation Kalatigi in western Mali also has at least 2 GTIAs named after the operation that units seem to rotate through. There's also GTIA Askia and Adrar operating near Kidal in late 2023. Learn more about Mali's conflicts with this video on Operation Serval, France's combined arms intervention requested by Mali to reverse a jihadist offensive. Just make sure to read the pinned comment when you get to 1117. I'll see you over there.